Good morning, everybody, and welcome at Palazzo Bobara for this masterclass about Prosecco DOC. We will be tasting 6 wines, 3 rosé wines and 3 white wines. We'll start off from rosé wines. It's going to be a somewhat different tasting than usual. I'm not alone, but because right next to me we have Andrea Battistella, who is the young vice director of the consortium of Prosecco DOC. Welcome, Andrea. It's a pleasure having you here with me because every time we'd like to know more, we can ask him because he's also an enologist. This is a very prestigious location, Sorobara, where Stendhal lived. So a friend who was more fond of Italy than his country. So he wanted to on an epitaph saying that he was a Milanese. And this is a parallel with what is happening with Prosecco in France, because we sell a great deal to French people. Of course, there's no overlap with champagne, but our French friends enjoy a lot our wine, which is democratic, which is a wine that I like, that is very friendly, and you can be very friendly with him. So it's not a wine that boasts off at all and brags. So it's not a wine that erects barriers such that you need to understand the wine. No, it's very straightforward, convivial, friendly. If you like, you can chat, you can open a bottle when you come back from work or for a cocktail, and lends itself very well for this use. And it's very proud of this. So Prosecco is very proud of this. In my area, we make the so-called Bianc Sprussad, which it means actually a glass of Prosecco with some Campari, with a few drops of Campari. This is simple, fun, nice to share, but at the same time, if you want to be a little more sophisticated, you can serve Prosecco GOC, maybe fresh, with a couple of slices of iced pear or apple that you can keep in the fridge. And if you suddenly have guests, you can, and also maybe you can put a leaf of mint or an aromatic herb, and that's something very sophisticated. Or we can drink it at home, and we'll discover this is a wine that is very versatile in terms of pairing, like no others. And first of all, I'd like to thank our friends in Moscow, in Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and Shanghai, and where there was a tornado. And I hope so recently. So thank you for being there. Um, Hello, welcome. So we can start without any further ado with a short presentation that talks about the history and a few figures. It's going to be convivial and friendly, like the character of this wine, and then we will finally taste our wines. So let me start off the slides. So as you can tell, the area is the area of the village of Prosecco, because everything started off there. The Romans found in Friuli, Venezia Giulia, in this area, the kind of door to the east, and then from the harbors in that area, from the Gulf of Venice and Aquileia, they would sail towards the Mediterranean Sea. So many wines that were made there were then sent to the colonies of the Roman Empire. Prosecco is a tiny little village in this area that named the name of the variety, the first name of the Glera variety, because later on, to avoid problems with imitation, because you know you can make Prosecco in Australia ideally, and so they changed the name, and they called it Glera. And so now the variety used to make Prosecco is Glera. And actually, glera was the actual name of the variety from the ancient times, because when it was brought to Veneto, at the very heart of the province of Proviso, in the Pre-Alps and the Treviso hills, Conegliano, Vardobbiadere, and Asolo, so they started to call it Prosecco. And this is the origin of the triumph of this wine. So this is Italian wine par excellence across the world. It's the most imported and imitated. So I work for a TV broadcast called a Decanter, and in our area, when you start to have someone who imitates you, it means that you start to have quite good popularity. And Prosecco is one of the most imitated wines. We have the Prosecco, which is a cider made with pear, core secco, semi-secco, and every year, every month, we find some new wines, and also recently we have the famous story of the Croatian Prosecco that they are trying to sell. So, where do you stand with this fight? So, just to protect your name. Well, of course, we have nothing to do, nothing wrong with Prosecco, which is a passito wine. But what we don't like is the idea, because if we accept this typical mention that they want to have in Dalmatia, in this area, then this would weaken the principle of protection of designations, because designations are related to the area of these 9 provinces. And so that's a weakness, not only in the European Union, because then all countries can come up with a different traditional indication similar to Prosecco, but we would weaken the relationship with countries such as Australia, that is already making Prosecco. And also there is a lawsuit about that, and also bilateral agreements. And also other countries like UK. We make it, and then you argue, but you do what you like at home. That's not our appellations. This applies to Prosecco, but just like to all Parmigiano Reggiano and Spanish consortia support us. In Slovenians are trying to use the same name. So this is extremely. There was a poem devoted to this wine, and now I wanted to. So it was called Mela Aromatico. It means aroma of apple, which is Prosecco. This is the easier to recognize because of these nuances of apple, pear, banana. I have friends who live in the UK, and if you give them a bottle of Prosecco and one of champagne, they want Prosecco because it's recognizable, easy to drink, perfumed, soft, with an extra sweetness. And therefore, if you want to have fun, don't commit too much, and you want to have a fresh wine, well, there are no competitors whatsoever for Prosecco. And and also something else that is important is about Roccolo, because so he mentioned the Monte Berico, which is in the province of Vicenza. And so from in this historical route, we have the eastern boundary in the province of Trieste and the western boundary in the denomination of Vicenza, of the Prosecco DOC. So here you see also the itinerary of Prosecco. And then this was made official in 2009 with the DOC. As you can see, there are 9 provinces that make this wine, the Prosecco wine. And there are 2 regions involved almost completely. It's the largest designation of all, many bottles, and they are all very recognizable, and they have common features. They haven't invested anything because in these areas, they have always made this wine. And spritz was invented when the German soldiers came over to Italy. So they were used to beer, and so it was too strong, and so started to spray, so sprinkle, let's say, with some water to dilute it, and then the first spritz was invented, the white spritz. And then each and every one of these provinces designed a recipe for this cocktail. Another turning point in the history of this wine is certainly the foundation of the Conegliano Valdobbiadene Enology School. Um, Here it is, a fundamental school where they developed the techniques to make this wine. Before it was a turbid wine, a hazy wine, because it was made with the so-called ancestral method and bottle fermentation. And now we are recovering this method, which is called fondo with sediment. But now it's mainly used the Martinotti method or the Charmat method developed at the end of the 1800s by Martinotti. And it's the ideal method to make this wine. Yes, being an enologist, there are two ways to make spumante. The metodo classico, the champenoise method to make champagne in France. And metodo classico is for Trento Doc and Franciacorta. And then the Martinotti method, because Martinotti invented the method, or Sharma, because Sharma actually patented the autoclave. The two methods are different, but the principle is like a airtight vat, where second fermentation happens, and the sugars are turned in CO2 1 month. Sorry, and 1 month is pretty short to enhance the characteristics of the grape. Being on the yeasts is minimum 12 months, but can be even proteins, and give this softness and roundness, enhances the floral notes, whereas the metodo classico enhances the primary notes from the grapes. So we talked about the consortium, Prosecco DOC. So before, first of all, to be part of this designation, tastes like Prosecco. And so you make a wine that in the end has a different taste. You would create a lot of confusion among consumers, which is important across the world. And all Prosecco DOC bottles have to carry a book with the disciplinare. And actually, we have some paper documents to fill. And when the products are ready for bottling, tests, pressure, alcohol, sugar, and all this is consistent with what 5 tasting committees that taste 20 samples a day. Of course, they don't drink and say, yes, this is typical, or at least it has the minimum requirements to be called Prosecco DOC. Then when it's to apply to each bottle. And then with the sommelier make. So we inspect these numbers and we understand the vineyard it comes from. Because a designation that includes a new wine is something in 2017 with Pinot Noir vinified in paint. And to start from the first bottle of Prosecco Rosé that is going to be an extra brut. Therefore, pretty rare style in the world of Prosecco DOC because the residual sugar is lower than brut or extra dry that are the most widespread styles. Let me pick the description, and in the meantime, I'd like to ask Andrea to tell us something about this project. Yes, the project around Prosecco Rosé started in 2017 as an idea, and then end of 2020 the wine was first released. And so we had, of course, to change our rule book And I would like to start from the idea that we expressed earlier, because Prosecco is not the name of a wine, so it's not the name of a variety, and it's not the name of a production method, but the name of a territory. So in this territory, there are also human factors. And, Italy's genius, the know-how of winemakers, the skills of winemakers, so much so that from the beginning of 2000, Prosecco wineries had already included in their portfolio a spumante rosé that could be made with Glera and Pinot Noir. And this production started to gain ground, especially in foreign markets such as the US, Canada, but also France. And therefore, when this production that is in line with the Prosecco principles, both in the vineyard and in the cellar, so in 2017, the time came to consolidate this production within the framework of the rulebook of Prosecco DOC, which was already made in this territory. And we made some tests and experiments to identify the best techniques to make an excellent product. And we bought some autoclaves, 30-liter autoclaves, similar to a demi-jaune. So with everything, the barometer, the pressure gauges, we made various tests with, also in terms of blends with Pinot Noir, vinified in red, and various periods of aging on the yeast, because Prosecco is kept on the yeast for 30 days. So we tried it in the autoclave 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and then we figured out what was the most suitable process to make an excellent wine. And actually, Prosecco Rosé has to spend twice as long compared to the plain Prosecco. This is the second big difference. And then another big difference is that rosé wines have less sugar, lower residual sugar. Why? For two reasons. First of all, is because Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is in a percentage 10, maximum 15%, and the rest is Glera, 85, 90%. So Pinot Nero, Pinot Noir, is vinified in red and so gives more structure, more body in itself. Then, thanks to these twice as long aging on the yeasts, the yeast starts to release its proteins. And therefore, this makes the wine softer and rounded on the palate. So a Prosecco DOC and a Prosecco Rosé, the Rosé seems seems more soft, like with the sense of red berries. And in the tasting, we will see that the characteristic features are raspberry, forest, strawberry, and red currant, red berries. So these are the main notes. Then the color is nice, as it is very homogeneous, very consistent. So it's a pale pink. And then when it's white, it's a straw yellow with greenish highlights. And this is the blush color, so Provençal pink, because Pinot Noir doesn't have much color, and therefore gives this pale pink color. So pale pink, which immediately attracts the consumers who, over the last few years, are appreciating more and more pink wines, rosé wines, and are now very popular. In the past, they were saying they are just something completely different, with a different dignity, different personality, which is very different from taste it. And first of all, the nose. Apart from the notes, we mentioned earlier also delicate citrus fruit. Let's take a sip. Sugar content go from 0.3, it's a brut natura, so no added sugar, then up to 6 extra brut, up to 12 brut, and then extra, and also the demi sec with 50 grams per liter. Over 50, we have the so-called dolce, so the sweet. This is not accepted for Prosecco, but it's in Asti and Moscato. And this, of course, must be paired with desserts in that case, even though, and so can appreciate extra dry wines, and the pairing is enjoyable, mainly for those who don't like tea, and the wine had a chance to develop all its aromas and not to lose them, because if fermentation is slow at low temperature, there's so the extra group brut, it makes it ideal for an aperitif or shellfish, for instance. I like that a lot. Seafood, smoked salmon. Yes, smoked scented food. And by contrast, so if you have sweet notes on the dish, you should have freshness, minerality, and acidity in the glass, so that they don't overpower each other. And this should never happen. So this is a very important golden rule. So sweet food want to have a sweet wine, so that none overpowers the other. And it's important always to look for this pleasant note from extra brut to extra dry. We have 60% extra dry and 40% brut, if we have to break down the sugar content. But what matters is that we have this pleasure on the palate, because extra brut should never be angular. I mean, you can have a more acidic notes, but you always have to have a balance. On the contrary, for extra dry or dry, so the sugar shouldn't prevail, it shouldn't overpower. It always have to be balanced. And the enologist should just accompany the wine making, that is to say, accompany this transformation process and intervene the least. Also because the distinctive features of the variety have to stand up from the grapes and not from the secondary transformation processes, like because the main notes should be fruit and flowers. And so the enologist is in a very tricky position, because it has to be balanced and don't move too much, and don't add or change too much. And that's your job. So nature, you have to let nature unfold and always support the best balance. Yes, and because on the one hand you have the vineyard, and on the other you have the market, and maybe the consumers want it in different ways. So it's hard to reconcile these two factors. But we were talking about versatility of Prosecco DOC, that's why it's so popular. And this is why it is very much appreciated both in Italy and abroad. Remember that 78% of Prosecco is exported, of 500 million bottles. So about 400 million bottles are exported over to the UK, Germany, US, and the fourth market is France. Then it's beautiful because Prosecco listens to consumers, and then and that's why Rosato was made. So they made this rosé and communicated it well. So consumers want drier wines, fine. Let's lower the sugar content. Prosecco has always been extra dry, fine. Let's make a brut and an extra brut. Why not? So this is the strength of this denomination, which is so pop, because Prosecco reminds me of Madonna, the singer. So Prosecco is the Madonna wines. So we all know it and we all enjoy it. And there's always an occasion of life to drink a Prosecco, even though you are a super expert. To many Italians, this is the entry wine, and for many young people, it's the wine that is very approachable and lends itself for many occasions. And this is innovation that turns into tradition that turns into innovation. So in the past, we had the Prosecco with the sediment, and now the autoclave is compulsory. So we have to have very clean cellars, not to have external contaminations, and preserve the characteristics of the original grapes. Okay, let's move to the second rosé wine, which is a Prosecco DOC Rosé vintage wine. Also, the other was a vintage wine, 2020. But in this case, we have 2% more Pinot Noir compared to the previous wine, and it's sweeter, brut, residual sugar of about 8 grams per liter. The color is in line with what it should be. So these 2% additional Pinot Noir didn't change the color much. They are identical. And this is also about creating the identity from the visual standpoint. For instance, Cerasuolo has a more dark, can have a darker pink or paler pink. But actually, we decided to make a product that could be recognizable also in terms of color. And you managed to do that because the majority of these rosé is bottled in clear glass, and so it's certainly attractive. And the the market wanted a clear bottle, but not the enologists, because to protect the color and the product from oxidation, it would be best to have a dark bottle, like in the third case. Yes, but I mean, you drink it immediately. You buy and drink it immediately. You don't keep it for long. But you know, we technicians, we are a bit Talibans, and there are some vertical tastings of the vintage Prosecco. We can taste a Prosecco made in 2000, 2005. Yes, that would be interesting. Maybe for next year Milano Wine Week 2021. That would be very interesting. Because in that case, you see the evolution of how Prosecco can change for the best and for the worst too. Uh, the aromas in the second wine are more intense, and with more sugar, you have a more intensity. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Andrea. Well, yes, sugars release terpenes, which are the scents of wine, and they have a chemical connection with sugar. So the more sugar, the more you have this aromatic potential. And here I would say then ripened strawberry, melon, so greater complexity. And also soft banana and rose water. Fine perlage, more softness. And before that, we said smoked salmon, and here you can have a nice bruschetta with some sour cream. And if we are vegans, we can pair it with raw vegetables, but also omelets with, for instance, with tomato. Then we have the third one, and also sapidity on the palate. Yes, you perceive it and it's very pleasant. So you drink it and it's nice. So the balance between the acidity and sweetness is very pleasant on the palate. And then you lick your lips and it's wonderful. And you want to have another sip. Okay, let's move to the third winery, Le Rughe Brut. And we go into the province of Belluno, higher altitude, and we can see Cortina ski resort with beautiful landscapes, still Mazzinotti method, more freshness because the cold winds coming down from the Dolomiti Alps in summertime sanitize the grapes and minimize the risks of fungal infection and stimulate the grapes to generate more scents. When we have a significant temperature difference between daytime and nighttime, there's a contraction of the skin, thus making the grapes to try to protect them with aromatic flavors, also to attract birds and animals that eat these berries and then spread the seeds and are more perfumed. Yes, the second has more intensity on the nose, but I put Le Rughe third place because of the elegance. It's very elegant and citrusy and well balanced. So I really wanted to finish. Yes, there is this nice finesse, which is not. I mean, you've got like to listen to this wine to perceive it. And as soon as you smell it, you have citrus fruits, tangerine, red apple, strawberry, unripened strawberry. And then when you taste it, you have an aftertaste that reminds me of the Carcade tea and that I like a lot. And also the structure of the third wine is more complex because of the geographical position. And so it's more lingering on the palate. Yes, it's more persistent. And actually it can pair beautiful with oysters and also spicy food. For instance, if we have paprika, maybe not too piquant, or red pepper, we can venture a pairing with, for instance, a risotto with red peppers. How much sugar? 6 grams per liter.
come zuccheri siamo tra i primo e il secondo.
So we are between the first and the second. First, 3.5. So you can tell it's drier.
Secco rispetto al secondo.
So this is drier.
Ma questa
Questo è
sfumatura,
molto
questa
interessante.
persistenza e questa maggiore
So this
complessità
persistence and more complexity
che comunque si fanno sentire sul palato, nonostante il secondo avesse un residuo zuccherino maggiore
are
che
pretty
ovviamente
evident on the palate, even though the second one was more intense on the nose.
Poi il terzo sì, è molto interessante,
But the
molto
third
bello.
one is very
Mentre il
interesting,
secondo
actually.
ha molto più
The second
una
is
percezione
more
olfativa maggiore, il terzo
intense on the
molto
nose. The
sottile
third
e il
is very
livello
fine,
olfativo più basso.
both on the
Gustivo
nose
è
and on the
molto molto
palate.
importante qua, non importante
I
come
would
nome
say that
davanti,
it's
la tipologia.
full-bodied,
Ma forte,
always considering the type of
di forza del consorzio,
wine.
questo
And
sicuramente.
another strength of the consortium is communication, because communication is very important in all areas, arts, sports, wine, and this in all countries where Prosecco is drunk. And so that's why young people like it. So the millennials, for instance, they want to have continuous things that to do. And so they all enjoy Prosecco. And I'd like to share a video, and I asked Fausto, our director, to broadcast about rosé. So you can see how this consortium communicates.
Make a greater toast. Prosecco Doc Rosé. The same Italian genio. A new and surprising way to express excellence. Prosecco Doc Rosé. Drink pink.
Drink pink, non ve lo dimenticherete mai.
So you'll never forget, drink pink. So drink pink.
Una volta
It's
che siete al bar,
memorable.
che magari un
So
quarto d'ora per bere un bicchiere di
first,
prosecco
if
costa
you are at the bar
20
and
euro
you don't have much time to
il
spend with
prosecco c'è di
friends,
quel tricolore,
you
capisce
serve
l'etichetta,
Prosecco
drink,
Rosé,
dai beviamo
drink
questo.
pink, and then
Rosa
off
e
you go.
rosa.
Rosa e rosa, ma
And
anche,
then we
anche.
have the Italian Osa
Bene,
in Rosa, like
adesso
dare
passiamo
in
però
pink.
ai bianchi, perché
Now
abbiamo
let's
anche il
move
primo,
to
no?
white wines,
Il
white
primo è il
Proseccos.
Villa
The
Santi,
first one is
Prosecco
Villa
DOC,
Santi,
Treviso Brut il Fresco.
Treviso Brut
Quindi
il
torniamo
Fresco.
allo stile
So we
classico,
go
perché
back to
possiamo
the
partire nel
classical
mondo
style. So we
occidentale.
started
Ne
from
abbiamo
rosé,
uno che è
innovative,
specializzato
and we go back
nell'italianizzare
the
tutto il
classical
superlativo, il Prosecco
Prosecco,
DOC.
so the
Siamo
white
nella zona
one.
di
We're in
Treviso,
the area
questa
of
super
Treviso,
zona
and
che
Villa Santi
è
also makes Conegliano
superiore
Valdobbiadene,
DOCG,
Superiore
e da
DOCG.
Treviso insieme alla
And
Trieste
Treviso
nella
and
sottozona
Trieste are two
Prosecco
subzones
DOC.
of the
Entriamo
Prosecco DOC
ora in questo recitato.
designation that
Uno
amongst
che
the
come
most
vedete è già
historical and
bastante
ancient.
vino,
It's a straw yellow,
veste
as you can
straordinarie,
tell,
veste
and
garbate.
with some greenish highlights.
Profumi sono
The
ovviamente
aromas
più freschi,
are
cioè
fresher,
di mela gialla, si
of
va per
yellow
assaporarsi un po' altro
apple,
nel vino, no? Se prima avevamo aromi di frutta rossa, di frutta scura che
um,
poteva essere il
so
melone, qui
before we had
invece
melon, red fruit,
scompaiono e
whereas
con la
here
lentezza
we
quindi
mainly
piena
have
di mela
aromas
l'abbiamo
of
riteniamo più
pear,
fresca
golden
e poi come
apple.
vedrete
And
assaggiandolo
when you
c'è anche
taste
un
it,
punto
you'll see
di
that there is
liquirizzato.
also licorice
Un
root
po' di
in the
esotico e la
finish.
parte secondo
Yes,
me più umana.
something exotic and also citrusy.
Perlage è
The
più
perlage
importante
is
rispetto
more
ai
relevant
primi tre che abbiamo
than the
bevuto,
three
però
previous
resta comunque
Proseccos.
cremoso in bocca,
But it's creamy,
una bolla aggressiva
and the
troppo grossa,
bubbles are not too harsh, too
quindi in
aggressive, too
abbinamento
big.
classico del
And here the
Prosecco è
classical
vizi e vizi,
pairing is
abbinamento cromatico,
with
perché quando non sappiamo da che parte girarci quando
because
abbiniamo un vino, siamo
when we
sempre iniziali all'abbinamento
don't know
cromatico, proprio
what
perché alla
to
brace
pair, we
serviamo
can always
un vino
pair
chiaro,
based on colors.
abbiniamolo più bianco,
So we
vizi e
can
vizi,
pair
ad
it with
esempio,
Risi and
io nella
Bisi.
Prosecco assaggiato
I tasted
in
it
abbinamento
the
a
other
piatto
day
di
with
povera asparago,
dish
spezzati anche
of an
spurzolantissimo,
omelette,
pasta
so
alle
eggs
verdure,
and
anche
asparagus, or
meraviglioso.
pasta with vegetables. It's also wonderful.
Che cosa? Cioè, tu con cosa lo bevi? Qual è il tuo piatto
Lei
ideale?
per me accompagna ogni piatto,
Ah sì,
sia
eh? È
monotematico
vero, la
che...
I
versatilità,
think
no?
it's
Perché già
good
lui
for
dice è
any dish.
versatile. E il prosecco che comunque ha un acido zuccherino maggiore, dei profumi maggiori, una morbidezza maggiore,
So
è
more
ancora più
softness,
versatile
more
praticamente.
scented, and so it's even more
Qui a
versatile.
Treviso
And at
seguono il
Treviso, Prosecco is the flagship wine. So when you go out, you drink Prosecco. Of course, also other wines, because in the area there are also still white wines and also red wines, Raboso and others.
Sì,
Raboso,
perché è
Rabbioso.
acidissimo il raboso.
Yeah, it's very acidic.
Secondo bianco, questa
And then
volta
second white
Torresella,
Prosecco,
Prosecco DOC
Torresella,
Extra Dry.
Prosecco
Ecco
DOC
perché
Extra
abbiamo
Dry.
assaggiato
So
primi
that's why we
rosati
tasted
e poi i
rosés
bianchi,
first
perché
and
i
then whites,
bianchi
because whites
comprendono quello che è extra dry, quindi
include two
sappiamo
extra
che con
dry
l'extra
wines,
bitterness
so
abbiamo più
more sugar,
intensità
more
e
intensity,
quindi insomma è
and
giusto comunque comporre
then it's good
zuccherino maggiore.
to end
Siamo
with
nella zona
more
di
sugar.
Venezia,
We are in the
altra
area of
città
Venezia,
legatissima a questo vino, il Prosecco. L'Ombra de Vin
and
a
this
Venezia
is
è un
very
drink
typical of
fantastico, è
Proseccos. In Venice, we say the
inestragibile,
Ombra de
quindi
Vin,
ora
which is a
facciamo
glass
un po'
of
qualitino di
wine at
bar,
the bar
ok,
at
come il
the inn,
Prosecco, senza
which
essere
is called
fischisti,
Baccaro in
con questo
Venetian
bicchiere di vino
dialect.
ombra,
So,
perché
and
lo fanno
so we
all'interno
say that
di uno di
it,
questi sopra, no? E anche
which
lì
is called
spritz,
Ombra de Vin. And
sicurezze,
again, a lot of
convivialità e
spritz,
aperitivo, stare
cocktails, and then
insieme,
conviviality,
condividere.
aperitives, sharing,
Questo
conviviality.
sapete
And I'm sure
ha una sua personalità, perché poi come
you
sempre che
this has a
bisogna usare
personality
dei
of its
termini
own.
disciplinari, dei termini di
Of course, we have
riconoscibilità,
to stick
però per esempio all'interno del bar a Sofia
to the rule
abbiamo
book, but
presente
each
questo
area has its
Prosecco
own signature.
DOC, lo chiamiamo
This Prosecco is more herbaceous, more reminds me of aromatic herbs, of medical herbs, and darker notes, less solar.
Vegetale proprio.
Yes, very
anche le
herbaceous.
mandarine
Fine
come
bubbles,
presuppongo quindi l'abbinamento ideale
and
per
therefore the
accompagnare
ideal pairing
un bel piatto di
is with a
tortelli
nice
piano piano così
dish
sulfuroso.
of
Pianissimo, semplice,
tortelli,
goduria massima. La
which
bollicina
is
si
very
perde totalmente
enjoyable.
con
The
questo bocca
acidity and
e questi
intensity
aromi
of
vegetali
Prosecco clean
sono
your
sulla
mouth,
stessa
and
altezza
these
d'onda
herbaceous aroma
del ripieno.
are in
Champagne
line
infatti
with
porta
the
Qui sentite, vedete,
of the
coglie questo zuccherino, no? Che dà questo
tortelli
zucchero
with
proprio al
ricotta
Prosecco.
cheese
Questi fai
and
che
spinach.
cos'è? Questi tre che erano, diciamo, un
Compared
prodotto,
to the
tre o sei ragazzi.
rosé wines, we had
Il primo piatto
8
era quello che
grams per
sicuramente
liter of sugar.
era voluto, ma questo
The
non era
first
voluto,
one
era abbastanza
was
elevato. In
pretty
questo
high
si riesce proprio a
sugar
percepire
content.
quello che
In
è
the fifth, we
la
truly
categoria
perceive
extra
the
dry, che sono
extra
quelle
dry
che è più
category,
morbida,
which is
le altre un po'
softer.
più decise,
The
no?
others were more,
Questo è proprio per
let's say, more
cogliere quello che è
full-bodied. This is softer.
l'esigenza del consumatore che
And this
magari
is
noi vogliamo proprio
to meet
qualsiasi quello che
the
possa
needs
essere
of
dovesse
consumers. Today we are connected
possono
with
essere
China
questi
and
proprio i
Moscow,
loro
and in China prefer
maggiore
most
zucchero e quindi si spingono più
wines with
verso dry
higher residual
E
sugar, so
dicevano
dry and extra dry.
l'acidità, la
And
mineralità
acidity,
sono degli extra.
minerality
Questo
is
perché
less
così?
important
E mi incuriosiva anche, perché voglio dire, il
than
champagne noi ci conosciamo
sweetness.
perché
And also in Russia, so champagne is
l'aveva
what it
finito
is because Guido Glico started selling to the Russian Tsar champagnes with a residual sugar of 300 grams per liter. So something very sweet.
Caterino è precipitato giustamente, però il gusto nasce da lì,
And
cioè
this is where, from where the taste comes
l'uso
from. So
sorgente
it's enjoyable,
e poi
it's
soprattutto
fresh, it
questo
fills your
clima,
mouth,
cioè veicoli profumi e
and
sapori
then
particolarmente
sugar
forti.
carries more flavors and
Passiamo
aromas.
all'ultimo
Let's move over to the last
assaggio
one,
oggi
last taste
che è
today.
secondo me
Last wine today.
più notevole
That
di
is the
tutti, il più
most
costoso.
perfumed and
L'azienda è
rounded
Ponte
and softer. Company is
1948,
Ponte,
Prosecco DOC Treviso,
1948, Prosecco DOC Treviso,
anche lì extra
area of
dry,
Treviso, extra
23%
dry,
acidità, questo è
100%
dopo
glera,
che si sono anche aggiunte varietà
even though there
autoctone
are
come
also
il
other
Prosecco
indigenous
speciale del
varieties that
formaggio,
can
però
be
il
part
Prosecco
of the
DOC
blend, but in Prosecco DOC, it's almost always at least
certificato per quello che è il
85% should be
15%
glera.
dicevi
15%, as you've
Facciamo però
said,
appunto
can
il
be
capitolo
indigenous
della
varieties,
Trevigiana,
Vertiso,
sono quelli
Bianchetta Trevigiana,
internazionali, i
or
piccoli diciamo,
internationals,
sia
Pinot and
Pinot Bianco
Chardonnay,
anche Pinot Nero
Pinot Gris,
vinificato in bianco,
and also
Pinot
Pinot
Noir
Noir
in,
vinified in
in rosso
white,
e lo Chardonnay, quindi
and
diciamo
Chardonnay.
questa è la base
So
ampelografica per
this
la
is the
produzione di
ampelographic
Prosecco.
base for
siamo nella zona
production of
del Piave,
Prosecco.
del Piave.
We are in the area of Piave.
Di scheletro, di
Ecco,
terriccioli.
So with a strong texture, more
queste sono
pebbles, more
tutti quadri
rocks,
che da tutti quegli
and
esperti
that's
italiani
positive for the
della
vines
gestione
because
delle
wines
riprese
want
dovresti
well-drained
tirare e
soils,
soprattutto
and roots have to
entrare
be
nel
free
terreno,
to
farsi
breathe,
spazio, andare a
and
cercare
then
l'acqua
find water in the
naturalmente
soil,
in terreno ci
in the
sono
water
questa serie
table,
delle uve
to
e di
then
conseguenza del vino. Terreno ciottoloso
feed
può dare anche
the grapes.
reali
And this
tanti
pebbly
frutti
soil can give
formando
fruity and floral aromas. And actually, here we have, for instance, dandelion. I remember I liked to go in the fields with, and I would pick dandelions, and then I would
la melamatura, la mela,
keep
gli
squeeze
agrumi,
them in
diciamo i
my
frutti
hands and
secchi
perceive
molto eleganti
the
e
scent. And also there is wisteria and wildflowers and also chamomile. I have this impression.
bocca la bolla
On
decisamente,
the palate, the
questo dopo il
bubbles
sorso
are present
si
and
nota
intense.
di maggior
And then you notice that there
residuo
is
zuccherino,
more
maggior
residual
bottigliezza,
sugar,
questa
more
fase lì
softness,
vorrei che il gusto fosse
sort
rialzato.
of aftertaste of acacia flowers. And you can fry them, and are very reminiscent of bee walks and honey. And this is something I like very much.
Concludo con
And
l'ordinariezza
I'd like to close with the pairing.
e ricorderò sempre
And I'll
che
always
quello che differirà nella
remember
cucina l'ho vissuto
in
tantissimi
Rome.
anni nella capitale
I
e
lived many years
portarono
in
una
Rome,
frittata alla
and
matriciana
one day
che
at
là
an
è
enoteca at a wine bar, they brought
incredibile.
the
E
amatriciana
questa enoteca
omelette.
famosissima, Tremani, storica,
So
ormai
famous
quasi
enoteca
industriale.
Trimani, also
Quindi uova,
very
pomodoro,
popular.
pecorino guanciale,
And so there was a perfect combination of eggs,
un sapore importante,
pork,
Prosecco, e hanno
guanciale,
dato un rosso
and the
super
tomatoes.
scarico, era un
And
vino che
they gave
avevano
me
come
the Burgundy Pinot
acidissimo.
Noir, very acidic.
Non ci sta, un buon
And it
ingrediente
was very
adocchiato, perché il
bad
pecorino guanciale
because,
nel prosecco potrebbe
pecorino, pork has a very barnyardy
consigliato prosecco extra
center.
dry
And so
per
I
il
wanted to
periodo
taste an
come si
extra
trovava
dry
tantissimo di
Prosecco
prosecco
because in those days there was a lot of
e
talking
volevo
about Prosecco.
assaggiarlo. Me lo portò
And
e aveva
they
detto
served it to
combiniamo
me, and it was
perfetto
an
perché
ideal
quei
pairing
piatti che avevano
because that
tantissimi
omelette
profumi, aveva
with
bisogno di un
all
vino
those
molto
flavors
perfetto per
needed a
quell'occasione là. E
soft
proprio questo residuo
wine with an
zucchero
intense
di
nose.
stare
And
alle
this
basi
residual
di quella
sugar
preparazione,
made it
perché poi
possible
lì si
to
era anche un mondo che
pair
noi
very well with
gente che
the
frequenta il vino
omelette.
spesso abbiamo dei
And so
preconcetti, dicono
sometimes we
vabbè
have
questo è extra dry,
biases against the
quindi
extra
ma
dry,
nei
but
precetti
then
siamo stati
my
sicurati che
biases
nei casi
shattered.
extra dry
And
perfettamente
so
eliminati.
extra dry is fine, don't eliminate it.
Volevo infatti sugli extra dry e l'extra
And
brut,
as to extra dry and extra
diciamo
brut,
il
if you
confronto
still have
tra
some, compare
il,
the last
il
one,
primo,
Ponte,
il Polo
and the
Strike che ha
first
3
one,
grammi,
the
quindi
first
vediamo
rosé
se
that has
effettivamente sono
3
sottili
grams.
e mi
And you can
sostiene che
tell the
sì,
difference is
di no,
Va bene,
per il
10
nome
la
grams
differenza e
different.
concludiamo perché poi
And then
dalla
we can
Mosca
close
e
because
dalla
from
Cina dopo
Moscow
poco
and
saranno
China
altre
and Hong Kong,
masterclass.
they have additional
questa è
master
l'ultima
classes.
cosa però che volevo fare
So
ultimamente, magari
last
anche
thing
se
I'd like
in
to
occasione.
underline
Il primo è
is that
prodotto
the
nella
first is
bellissimo
made in the area
Belluno.
Treviso
Questo siamo a
Pordenone.
Treviso, qua siamo a Belluno,
This is
siamo a
Belluno,
Treviso,
this is
nella
Treviso,
provincia di Venezia, e
Treviso,
qui siamo sempre
Venice,
nella parte
Treviso,
centrale, quindi bassa
in
Treviso.
the lower
Quindi
part.
all'interno della stessa
And therefore, in
denominazione
the same appellation,
tante tecniche
same
produttive,
production
vediamo che il
techniques,
terroir
we
quindi
can see
sia
that
il
the
terreno
terroir
ma
is
anche
very
se sono
diverse, the
climati
soil, the
antichi della zona,
climate
va a cambiare
is
quelle
very
che sono poi le
diverse, and therefore
caratteristiche
changes
olfattive o
the
aromatica del vino.
olfactory and
Quindi andare
sensory
proprio ad
characteristics
ascoltare
of the wine. And
queste
so it's also
differenze
nice to be
sulle
able to
bottiglie, anche perché
perceive
insomma
these
Lo dici
differences
perché
in
il
these
consorzio sta
bottles.
facendo un lavoro di
You
mappatura
say this
veramente
because the
bene delle
consortium is
denominazioni.
mapping out
Esatto, la zonazione
the
enogastronomica,
various areas,
no?
the
Sessuale,
zoning. This was
l'Etna,
done
lo fa anche il
also by
Prosecco, naturalmente.
for
Quello che ti sto
Barolo,
dando
for
è il
Etna,
consorzio
and
Prosecco
they
d'Oro.
do that also for
Quindi questa
Prosecco.
differenza ovviamente partiamo
So
dall'extra
of
dry,
course we start from extra dry,
no, l'extra brut.
l'extra brut,
sorry,
scusate,
sorry, extra
ovviamente
brut,
l'extra dry è più veloce, secchissimo dopo che abbiamo bevuto
very
questo.
dry.
Cioè sentiamo l'amaro, no? Entra in
So
bocca
we have that
quindi non aveva
bitter
senso
note.
partire dai bianchi
So
per
it
poi
didn't make sense
arrivare
to start
ai
from
perfetti
whites
aromati,
to move to rosé.
è
So
partito
that's why we
dalla
started off
tonalità e
from this innovation
dal colore più
and
scuro.
from
Non è
the
piaciuto
darker color.
tantissimo a
And
distinzione
also
del
super
bianco
important,
profondo,
since we are
bisogna
connected with the
trovare
world,
alla lattina.
you
Poi
can
lattina
also,
non
so
è
if it's
prosecco d'oro.
drafted
Non dice prosecco,
draft,
prosecco
or
vino
so
o è
there's no
prosecco?
prosecco draft
Cosa si sa?
prosecco, and there
Però
you
è
always have to
successo un
find
paio
the
d'anni
government
fa,
strip.
anzi forse l'anno scorso, ecco.
But
Questa qua, cos'è?
Il botone
this
automatico,
is an
prosecco
automatic
automatico.
dispenser, like an
Automatus
ATM,
a
you know,
Londra è
in
automatica.
London,
È automatica. Potete capire in
and
3 giorni, perché poi dopo naturalmente il
incredible.
consorzio Prosecco si è
Then the
attivato a fare
consortium of
cose.
Prosecco.
Quanti post siano stati
So
fatti
many posts were
informatici di
made
questa cosa?
about
Proprio
this.
per
I'm very
sottolineare la
excited.
facilità,
So to
l'accortezza, la
underline our
semplicità, la
affable and
leggerezza che
simple
imponi per questo vino.
uh, of
Ma
simplicity of
sì,
this
ma
wine.
c'è
So
ragazzi,
people like it,
bambini che
young
si è
people
avvicinato al
like
mondo
it.
del vino. Cioè, se sei un
People approach the
imprenditore di
world
vino
of
che
wine. So
vuoi
if you
fare,
sell wine
diciamo,
and
scuderia, non vuoi
in
fare
your
whisky, no?
store, you
Perché
cannot
ti puoi
have
incappare nei guai, quindi
You have to have a Prosecco. Also in bars is the bestseller. And the consortium and the producers are working hard to make it also a modern product. Then sustainable from the environmental standpoint, from the economic and social standpoint, not too sweet, not too tricky. And also they don't communicate it. So it's just
Lusso democratico.
Prosecco.
Esatto,
It's like a
esatto.
democratic luxury,
È la sua forza, è
daily
ovviamente il
luxury.
vino italiano
And
più
it's no coincidence
riconosciuto,
that
più
it's the
esportato nel cuore
most,
dell'Unione Europea, mi pare,
so the
questo
bestseller wine
che si può
across the
trovare.
world, Italian wine.
Grazie a tutti di averci
Thank you
seguiti,
all
di aver
for
degustato
joining
insieme a noi.
and for
È
sharing
stato
this
un
tasting with
onore
us. It
per
was a
me
honor
essere qui ed
to
essere
be
qui
here and be
con
connected
il resto del
with the
mondo
rest of the
orientale.
world.
Spero che i vini vi siano
I
piaciuti, che
hope you
non vi
like the
siate
wines,
intossicati
that
quando
I wasn't too
scegli di
boring, but
bere.
this hardly ever
Quindi non mi
happens
resta
when you drink
che
Prosecco.
ringraziarvi,
So thank you
salutarvi,
very
darvi
much
appuntamento al
and
prossimo
see you
anno con
next year
la Milano Wine
with
Week
Milano Wine Week
2022. Grazie ad
2022.
Andrea
Grazie
Thank you,
Andrea,
Andrea.
per
grazie a voi,
Thank you.
il
anche.
supporto, grazie
And thank you
a
all.
Fabio, il grande
Thanks
sommelier
to
del
Fabio,
vino, grazie a
the
Paolo, il
sommelier,
nostro
Fausto,
regista,
our
a
director,
Federico Gordini e a
Federico
tutte le
Gordini, and
persone
all the
che ci
people
hanno
who
aiutati e
helped us
supportati
and
in
supported us
questo breve
in this
racconto
tasting
dell'Italian style, l'Italian lifestyle.
about Italian lifestyle.